Contrary to the Code of Canon Law of 1983, which attempts to change the primary purpose of marriage, the real primary purpose of marriage is having children and bringing them up for God. Marital relations are therefore involved in the primary purpose of marriage. St. Thomas Aquinas tells us, husband and wife are mutually bound to the payment of the marriage debt. Though the husband is the head of the household, husband and wife are equal in the marriage act. The husband is bound to the wife in all things pertaining to the husband. So is the wife bound to the husband in all things pertaining to the wife. When one spouse asks to have relations, the other must comply. The wife is not bound to pay the debt to her husband without being asked, whereas the husband is bound to pay it to the wife. But the question of this video is, are spouses forbidden from having marital relations on holy days? St. Thomas Aquinas tells us, just as certain places are holy because they are devoted to holy things, so are certain times holy for the same reason. But it is not lawful to demand the debt in a holy place. Therefore, neither is it lawful at a holy time. Although the marriage act is void of sin, nevertheless, since it oppresses the reason on account of the carnal pleasure, it renders a man unfit for spiritual things. Therefore, on days when one ought to especially give one's time to spiritual things, it is not lawful to ask for the debt. The emphasis here is that it's not permitted to ask for the debt. Although one is not bound to pray at all hours, one is bound throughout the day to keep oneself fit for prayer. Though St. Thomas tells us that it is not permitted to ask our spouse to engage in the marital act during a holy day, St. Thomas makes it clear that it is not a mortal sin. A wife or husband does not sin mortally by asking for the debt on a feast day. It is, however, a more grievous sin to ask for the sake of mere pleasure than through fear of the weakness of the flesh. In fact, the obligation to pay the marriage debt is so important that it takes precedence when our spouse makes a request, even if it is on a feast day. St. Thomas tells us, when one spouse asks at a festal time, the other must pay. Since the wife has power of her husband's body and vice versa, with regard to the act of procreation, the one is bound to pay the debt to the other at any season or hour, with due regard to the decorum required in such matters, for this must not be done at once openly. So even if the request for a marriage debt is made, it must not be done in a situation that would compromise the couple's modesty. While we're on the topic, I'd like to take a look at a paragraph from the Catechism of Trent, which I mentioned in a previous video that I did 5.5 years ago, but it's buried on the Ascent of Mount Carmel playlist, and it doesn't get many views nowadays. The Catechism of Trent tells us, but as every blessing is to be obtained from God by holy prayer, the faithful are also to be taught sometimes to abstain from the marriage debt in order to devote themselves to prayer. Let the faithful understand that this religious continence, according to the proper and holy injunction of our predecessors, is particularly to be observed for at least 3 days before communion, and more often during the solemn fast of Lent. Now this is particularly interesting because it assumes that the spouses would not be receiving communion on a weekly or daily basis. And that only became a regular thing with Pope St. Pius X. So at that time, the reception of communion seemed like a bigger event to most people, and many would prepare for it in advance. Frequent communion is not the culprit in the perceived lessening of the importance of receiving the Eucharist, but the decreased duration of the Eucharistic fast is a product of gradualism, and it is definitely a problem. The traditional fast is no food, no water, no medicine from midnight to the reception of the Eucharist. However, a mutual agreement not to engage in the marital act during Lent or during a part of Lent may still be in play. However, this decision must be made jointly between the spouses. No one can vow that which belongs to another. Without her consent, the husband cannot take a vow of continence, whether absolutely or for a time. The Catechism continues, by abstaining, the couple will find the blessings of marriage to be daily increased by an abundance of divine grace, and living in the pursuit of piety, they will not only spend this life in peace and tranquility, but will also repose in true and firm hope, which confoundeth not, of arriving through the divine goodness at the possession of that life which is eternal. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back again within a week with another one. But in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page and my Twitter page. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel. And also, please pray for the church.